The COVID inquiry continues should Boris Johnson apologise for how he handled the crisis. His former aides have suggested he wasn't equipped to handle things, and he's alleged to have questioned the need for lockdowns. Does the ex-Prime Minister need to say sorry? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. We'll speak to you after the break. OK, stay with me now. Section 60 of the Metropolitan Police Act in 1839 says that it is illegal to beat or shake rugs, carpets or mats, with the exception of doormats, before 8 a.m.
Good to know.
Do you know what? I thought this is a good opportunity to ask you about this. Can you actually sort of put these into practice? Like, if my neighbour shook their rug at 7:30,
Yep.
Can I actually
Video
take them to
evidence.
court?
Well, you could video it, you could make a contemporaneous note, and you could phone the local constabulary and say, look, I've got a crime here, and they'd probably conclude it's not actually in the public interest to pursue it.
So why don't they ditch the law then?
Well, there's so many archaic laws, aren't
Right.
there? And you know, there are so many archaic laws
Okay.
and lawyers. Audience
Right.
I gave myself away there.
Welcome. Nick and Georgie are with me now. Should Boris Johnson apologise for how he handled the pandemic and for the comments he's alleged to have made in March 2020? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need to give us a call. Former Downing Street aides are giving evidence at the COVID inquiry today, with Dominic Cummings comparing Mr Johnson to the mayor of Jaws, who refused to shut down the beaches. Now, ex-Downing Street Director of Communications Arcane was a little bit more diplomatic. Here's what he had to say.
I think what will probably be clear in COVID, it was the wrong crisis for this Prime Minister's skill set, which is different, I think, from not potentially being up to the job of being Prime Minister.
What do you mean by the wrong crisis for this Prime Minister's skill set, Mr Kane?
Could we use just straightforward English, Mr Kane, please?
So I think he's somebody who would often delay making decisions, would often seek counsel from multiple sources.
Now, these comments come just one day after the inquiry heard that Boris Johnson questioned the need for lockdowns. Now, according to notes in an aide's diary, Boris Johnson said, "Why are we destroying the economy for people who would die anyway soon?" He's also alleged to have said, "We're killing the patient to tackle the tumour." Georgie, it's going to be quite hard for a lot of people who lost loved ones during that time. But is it incumbent for the former Prime Minister to come out and say, sorry, mistakes were made, perhaps some of the things that we did weren't quite right, we apologise?
Well, but I want a more sincere apology than that. So, yes.
I didn't do a very good job.
No, you didn't do a very good job of that.
Sorry.
Yes, these are horrific comments. As you said, there are families who are currently grieving at the moment, who've lost, parents or children or loved ones. And they're basically saying that, these lives were collateral, that they probably had nothing else to give to the world. And, hey, it was worth it when it came to saving the economy. I mean, where's the humility? Where's the humanity? It's just, they are just so offensive on so many levels. And it shows just how incompetent he was, how he didn't take things seriously, his disregard for the human cost that was going on here. And it is honestly worse than what I ever could imagine. I thought it was pretty bad, but these kind of comments are sort of just completely off the mark.
We should say that the comment, why are we destroying the economy for people who would die anyway soon, was recorded in a meeting by Imran Shafi, former private secretary of Boris Johnson. Now, when asked whether the comments were made by his old boss, Mr Shafi said, "I can't say for sure, but I think it was the former Prime Minister." This was in a meeting between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. Nick, this inquiry is going to go on for quite some time. Yep. A lot of evidence is going to be gone through, and we will get some sort of judgment at the end of it. But for now, when people are hearing these horrific comments, do you think the former Prime Minister has got a case to answer?
I think the comments are brutal, but I think these comments were in the context, if he made them, and first of all, we don't know that he made them, but let's assume for the sake of this discussion he did make them. They're made in the context of him grappling with Sunak with the biggest problem after Brexit he's ever had to deal with. And if you start to edit a real and truthful discussion with countries' leaders, how are they ever going to resolve any issues? So, in his view, he was saying, look, the most vulnerable are going to die, so the alternative is we let people carry on, we don't crash the economy, because if we do crash the economy, people are still going to die. So he was just having a very frank conversation. It wasn't, just a moment, it wasn't a delicate conversation, but surely he's entitled, within the context of that conversation, it was a private meeting with Sunak, to say what he honestly believed. And it's quite clear he was against lockdown. Lockdown happened, I think, 3 days after this alleged conversation. And, who knows whether he was right or wrong? Did lockdown work? I'm not sure that it did. What he should do, in my view, is explain what he meant. Explain to the British public, this is what I was grappling with, these were the decisions I had to make, and I'm sorry if I sounded brutal, but I had to sound brutal.
And he will get a chance to do so, because he will also appear in the COVID inquiry. Go on, Georgie.
But for me, it points to the culture of him as a leader. It just the sort of cavalier attitude, the throwaway comments, the sort of speaking about people's lives in that way. It shows to me how this Prime Minister was just so unfit for the job.
All right, which is what we heard from Lee Kane there. Let's find out what people are saying at home, because obviously quite a lot of people want to have their say. Syra in London. Good afternoon, Syra. What would you like to say?
Yes, I mean, I've heard what he said, but it's a private conversation. And, it's not so much about what people say, but what they do. And I think Boris really led the country well during the COVID outbreak. My sister works in America, and the way the vaccines were rolled out there compared to England, Britain, I mean, he did a great job. And we have
but Syra, just to remind you, though, that when it comes to comparisons of deaths per million, we had more deaths per million than the US. In fact, when you look at all the G20 economies, sort of comparable countries, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Sweden, we've had a worse record than all those countries. So he kind of got all those decisions as correct as you're saying. But
No, but that's because, that could have been because the lockdown sort of took a little longer than, it arrived a little longer. But then, to be fair, those are difficult decisions. And, he had to make a decision regarding, crashing the economy or whether to actually, start, but I mean, when it came to doing the big things, and I think he did a great job. And yes, we had more mortality, but there are other confounding factors as well. Okay. So we have to look into that.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt you. Am I right in saying, are you a doctor?
Yes, I am a doctor.
So let me pass this by you. This came out in the inquiry. It's just come out now because it's all happening as we're on air. Sir Patrick Vallance wrote in his notebooks in August 2020 that Boris Johnson, and I quote here, was obsessed with older people accepting their fate and letting the young get on with life and the economy going quite bonkers, a set of exchanges. This idea that Boris Johnson was of the mindset of the older people, they should accept their fate and we should concentrate on the young people. As a doctor, how does that sit with you?
That doesn't sit. That wouldn't sit well at all. Did he say that? I mean, I've never heard him saying that on air or anywhere
This came from the notebooks of Sir Patrick Vallance. Again, they will all come out in the inquiry. But if he did say that, would that sit well with you?
There is no proof. I mean, I can just sort of tell you about how things went. And yes, the mortalities were higher. Probably the lockdown happened a little later, and there were other confounding factors as well. But the way the vaccines were rolled out, you have to give the credit where it's due. And this guy did a great job. Okay. And yes, he messed up the other thing, but at least as far as that's concerned, and I've got friends from all over the world. OK.
Sarah, thank you. I'm only going to leave it there because I want to squeeze in a few more people. Ruth in Hampshire. Good afternoon, Ruth. What would you like to say? Ruth, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead, Ruth. What would you like to say?
I just think Boris was a bumbling idiot through the lot of it.
What makes you say that?
Well, he didn't seem to know what he was doing. He said one thing and then did another, and it just kept on going right through his prime ministership.
OK. Nick, something that came out yesterday, Martin Reynolds from the Civil Service was giving evidence. Part of the evidence that came out yesterday was the frustration. Ruth used bumbling idiot as the words. That wasn't quite what they used there. But the idea that there was a lot of frustration behind the scenes, that Boris Johnson kept changing his mind.
Yeah, he did.
And that I think one of the phrases was the captain is changing the plays on the field every day. So we can't sort of get that consistency. What do you make of that and the criticism from Ruth?
Well, I think he, without question, yo-yoed. He capitulated time and time again. I think that's his personality, because what he was doing, he did really care about people, and he was listening to opinions. And when he heard an opinion which was contrary to his plan of action, he was persuaded.
Which is the absolute opposite of what you want from a leader.
But he'd never been confronted. No leader has been confronted in modern times with this sort of situation. So no one really knew how to deal with it. We were really in the dark. And, you know, to judge him from the number of fatalities, you have to spool back and say, look, we had a poor state of health for the nation. We had a poor state of national health. So there are a lot of other things at stake.
Yeah, but we're not just looking at the death count. We're looking...
he changed his mind all the time.
Yeah, we're
I
looking
agree.
at the fact that, you know, everybody, his closest sort of allies are now saying it was absolute chaos at the time.
Yeah,
that, they're conducting it all over WhatsApp, and it was, the sort of schoolboy antics of going on, sort of texting under the table.
Sure, but
that's politics. Yeah, that's a method of communication. At the end of the day, I don't believe he wanted it, and only time will tell whether actually, if he'd had the guts to say, actually, you know, he needs to be honest with the nation and say, look, the sick and vulnerable, please stay in. The rest, you'll probably have a nasty cold, but get on with your life. Let's keep the economy going. That might have been the better course, and I think that's the course he believed in, but he was persuaded to lock the country down, and I don't know whether that was for the benefit of everybody.
What's interesting is the decisions that people were confronted with and what they chose to do at the time is going to be the interesting part of the COVID inquiry. I think perhaps we can all agree that perhaps we've all said things in meetings that perhaps we would have been
I do agree.
Uncomfortable whether we said them out loud.
Yes.
If they out of context later.
It is different, you know, especially over WhatsApp and stuff like that. I wouldn't want some of my WhatsApps being shown, but they are now being shown, and there is a COVID inquiry, and it was really important decisions that are being made. So he has to now apologise. It's very simple. Let's
take some of your messages. Sue on Facebook says they should all be in prison for theft of taxpayers' monies and their total mismanagement of the whole pandemic. Susan on Facebook says it's easy to judge with hindsight, but no one actually knew what to do for the best at that time, which is your point as well, Nick. I wonder how much of this will affect, for example, the coming election, how much it's going to affect the Prime Minister, because let's not forget, he was in that room when it happened. He was the Chancellor. Coming out of some notebooks and evidence that he was not particularly pleased or unwilling to offer compensation for people to stay at home in isolation for the poorest paid. You know, that might come back to the Prime Minister.
A lot of people think the way he gave money away, it was like a money tree, wasn't it, without any due diligence, you know, and it's probably bankrupted the country. So he'll have his questions to answer without question.
All right. Well, look, we've used up all our time. Thank you so much to both of you. That's it for today. Thank you to Nick and to George.